The camp, it looks like a school made of red bricks, a very vast area. We had guards around us all the time. And I would think, why are we here? Why don't we just die instead of facing such hardship?
The voice that you've just heard belongs to an interpreter who's translating an interview with a man who says he was detained in an internment camp in Xinjiang. Xinjiang is a remote region in northwestern China. Recently, police there have allegedly detained massive numbers of Muslim ethnic minorities, mostly Uyghurs.
There have been credible estimates of between 800,000 to 1 million people from this region being held at political re-education centers.
A Wall Street Journal investigation indicates that people were taken to these camps against their will, without any kind of due process.
Growing evidence, backed by satellite footage, of what one commissioner called massive internment camps. In addition to the 1 million detained, another 2 million are thought to be in coercive re-education programs to push them to abandon their Muslim faith and heritage. Specialists on the area say there could be up to 1,200 camps, and the criteria for detention remains opaque. But reports of the camps, as well as kidnappings, mass DNA collection, and an atmosphere of martial law in the streets, are all part of a crackdown in recent years against what Beijing says is growing terrorism and religious extremism in Xinjiang, while critics say it's widespread religious persecution.
For 1 million Chinese Muslims in camps,
Right.
because the Chinese government cracks down on them because of their religion. Why, A, is that true, and B, why don't we hear more about it?
It's absolutely true. In fact, one of the outrages here is Google Earth. Pictures from Google Earth show us these camps. And so we read these reports about Google looking to partner up with China, again, going back to China. But it's their own pictures that have revealed this reality to the world. They open these places up, they call them re-education camps, where they're basically forcing people to change their names and do all sorts of things. By the way, there's no history of radicalism among this community of Uyghurs. That's the first point. But here's the outrage. Number one, American companies and Western companies that have sold them surveillance technology, that have allowed them to sort of put people through some of this, including an American DNA company. They're collecting the DNA of these individuals, by the way, as well, forcefully, and using potentially American technology to do it. And what about the Arab world and the Muslim world and all these countries in the Middle East? Not a single one of them. You know, they're the first to stand up and speak when there's a ban on travel or this or that. But they've been totally silent on this issue, and the answer is money. There's all this Chinese money flowing all over the world. They're bribing governments, and in this case, buying their silence on this atrocious, outrageous human rights violations that give us insight into the true nature of the regime of President Xi in China.
Inside, people are being forced to embrace Communist Party propaganda.
We would get up at 5, we would do a lot of learning, and we would sing songs for 2 hours during the day, sometimes 3 or 4 hours. We watch movies that praise Xi Jinping and also the Communist Party. They would also tell us about religion, saying, there is no such a thing as religion. Why do you believe in religion? There is no God. Do you have Quran at home? I had to say no to them because otherwise I would be put in jail.
We've heard stories about dozens of people being crammed into one room, forced to share a single toilet, being fed one meal of cabbage per day, and told not to talk to anyone else. One of them talked about being strapped in a metal chair alone in a room and being left there for hours or days. He said the psychological pressure was so great that he tried to commit suicide.
提示呢，把我这样子挂着，只能脚这样子塞到地上，就这样子挂着。4天4夜没有让我睡觉，我睡觉要把我的手挂在那个门上，天门上，就这样子折腾我，折磨我。脚绑在这儿，然后这个脚这个腿儿绑在这个床上，只能这样子，再多的活动不了。脚镣嘛，那个洞口里面放的那种脚镣，然后这装到这个里，放到这个里面，只能这样子。入了也是跟日本人一样这个样子，这样子。他们让我承认就是危害国家安全罪，第二个就是组织恐怖分子，煽动恐怖分子。
Radio Free Asia journalist Gulchera Hoja told Congress last month her family is in camps where Uyghurs are reportedly subject to torture and indoctrination.
And I learned in February that my aunts, cousins, their children, more than 20 people had been swept up by authorities in the same day.
That hearing was called by Senator Marco Rubio. Yesterday, he and 16 other Senate and House members sent the State and Treasury Departments a letter accusing China of arbitrary detention, torture, and egregious restrictions on religious practice and culture, and calling for sanctions on senior Chinese officials.
Earlier, the Chinese government objected today to a call by some U.S. members of Congress to levy sanctions on Beijing for its treatment of the Uyghur ethnic group, who live mainly in Western China. As Nick Schifrin reports, advocates for that Muslim minority say Uyghurs are now being rounded up by the hundreds of thousands.
In China's Xinjiang province, to be a Uyghur Muslim is to be accused of having a contagious disease. Muslims from Xinjiang to Beijing have long complained of state suppression, but now they say Chinese repression is stronger than ever.
A new investigative report is taking a deep dive into China's massive surveillance program and exposes some of its key targets at home and overseas. BuzzFeed News has published the article called Spy for Us or Never Speak to Your Family Again.
The report examines how China targets minorities within the country as well as exiled Chinese citizens and exiles living abroad. BuzzFeed News reporter Megha Rajagopal wrote the article, and she is with us now from Sydney on Skype. Megha, this is a fascinating story. It's really incredible. Your story focuses on the Uyghur minority being targeted in China's western Xinjiang province. Your reporting tells us that they're tracked and under surveillance even when they leave China. So why is this group on the government's radar? Explain to our viewers who may not be familiar with the background there.
So Xinjiang is this massive region in the west of China, and it's right on the border of Central Asia. And about half the population there is this minority group called the Uyghurs, and they're a Muslim ethnic minority group. They've lived in China for hundreds of years, and the government sort of fears that they're going to be part of, a separatist threat. They fear terrorist attacks originating from extremist groups from this minority region. In the past, China has dealt with terrorist attacks that they've blamed on Uyghur militants. And there are credible reports of Uyghurs going to fight with extremist groups in Iraq and Syria. But by and large, what we're seeing here is the collective punishment of literally millions of ethnic minorities in China for the actions of a small handful. And that's taking place both, as you said, within Xinjiang and when they migrate overseas.
Explain how the state of China's surveillance technology has changed and how it will look in the future.
Yeah, I think what we're seeing in Xinjiang is the rise of this kind of new form of techno-authoritarianism. So what they're doing is they're combining really heavy-handed human policing. So things like grid-style policing, which basically means you place, police units, little police kiosks and mobile police vans all over a city, in different increments, Combined with these things like DNA databases, iris scans, facial recognition technology, literally everywhere in the city, at checkpoints on highways, before you fill up at a petrol station, even airport-style security, before you go to places like shopping malls and kindergartens. It's just a really, really pervasive surveillance state.
When we went to Xinjiang last year, we found one of these camps just south of the city of Kashgar. We expected to see something like a small school. Instead, what we found had the look and scale of a full-size prison. Some of the walls were half-built, which made it clear that they were planning to expand the facility. Satellite imagery and information collected by a researcher in Canada indicate that the camp has recently undergone major construction. Just like this one, a number of other camps appear to have been massively expanded. And several similar facilities have been built from scratch in the desert. Internment camps are associated with some of the worst episodes in human history. It's striking to think that this kind of mass incarceration of a religious minority might be happening again in 2018.
These are crazy things. Things that we've read about that used to happen thousands of years ago, or things that happen under these regimes in a science fiction novel.
So I have to stand up. So I cannot give up.
As I have gotten older, I have decided we really need camps for adults. And we need the kind of camps that you all run. I mean,
under the provisions, would it be possible that an American citizen then could be declared an enemy combatant and sent to Guantanamo Bay and detained indefinitely?
I think that as long as that individual, no matter who they are, if they pose a threat to the security of the United States of America, should not be allowed to continue that threat.
Let the indefinite detention and torture begin. It hasn't even been a month since President Obama signed the controversial bill into law, and we are now seeing it become a reality. The National Defense Authorization Act, or NDAA as it's called, allows the government to detain and torture without trial anyone accused of having ties to terrorism, and that includes U.S. citizens. Campaigner for Roots Action, David Swanson, who stated more indefinite detention and torture here in the U.S. is just a few signs of what is to come. Take a listen.
Last night on 60 Minutes, you might have seen John's report. He asked retired CIA Deputy Director Mike Morrell about another controversial U.S. intelligence policy, the so-called enhanced interrogation of terror detainees after 9/11.
Let me read you a list of some of the techniques that were used by the CIA to get information: waterboarding, hitting, bouncing suspects off walls, confining them in small spaces, loud music, sleep deprivation, nudity, keeping suspects in physical stress positions. If these were Americans being held overseas by a foreign power, would we have called that torture?
And I actually, John, want to challenge you on the word torture. My officers carried out the guidance that was provided to them in both administrations.
We're ineffective. During one of the debates, they asked Lying Ted about waterboarding, and he didn't want to answer because it was a very, it was a question. What do you think about waterboarding? And he didn't want to get involved because he was afraid it wasn't politically correct. And he gave a nothing answer, a weak, pathetic answer like we always give. They asked me, what do you think about waterboarding, Mr. Trump? I said, I love it. I love it. I think it's great. And I said, the only thing is we should make it much tougher than waterboarding. And if you don't think it works, folks,
senior military leaders and distinguished guests, thank you all for being here as we prepare to sign something that is extremely important, the National Defense Authorization Act. We're signing it into law.